a Wikividi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy.
Juan Perón. Juan Domingo Perón was an Argentine lieutenant general and politician. After serving in several government positions, including Minister of Labor and Vice President, he was thrice elected President of Argentina, serving from June 1946 to September 1955, when he was overthrown in a coup d'état, and then from October 1973 until his death in July 1974. During his first presidential term, Perón was supported by his second wife, Eva Duarte, and the two were immensely popular among many Argentines. Eva died in 1952, and Perón was elected to a second term, serving from 1952 until 1955. During the following period of two military dictatorships, interrupted by two civilian governments, the Peronist Party was outlawed and Perón was exiled. When the left-wing Peronist Héctor Cámpora was elected president in 1973, Perón returned to Argentina and was soon after elected president for a third time. His third wife, Maria Estela Martínez, known as Isabel Perón, was elected as vice president on his ticket, and succeeded him as president upon his death in 1974. Although they are still controversial figures, Juan and Evita Perón are nonetheless considered icons by the Peronists. The Perón's followers praised their efforts to eliminate poverty and to dignify labor, while their detractors considered them demagogues and dictators. The Perons gave their name to the political movement known as Peronism, which in present-day Argentina is represented mainly by the Justicialist Party. Peronism is a political phenomenon that draws support from both the political left and political right. Peronism is not considered a traditional party, but a political movement, because of the wide variety of people who call themselves Peronists, and there is great controversy surrounding his personality. The following Argentinian presidents were Peronist: Héctor Cámpora, Isabel Perón, Carlos Menem, Eduardo Duhalde, Néstor Kirchner and Cristina Kirchner. Childhood and youth. Juan Domingo Perón was born in Lobos, Buenos Aires province, on 8 October 1895. He was the son of Juana Sosa Toledo and Mario Tomás Perón. The Perón branch of his family was originally Sardinian, from which his great-grandfather emigrated in the 1830s. In later life Perón would publicly express his pride in his Sardinian roots. He also had Spanish and French Basque ancestry. Perón's great-grandfather became a successful shoe merchant in Buenos Aires, and his grandfather was a prosperous physician. His death in 1889 left his widow nearly destitute. However, Perón's father moved to then rural Lobos, where he administered an estancia, and met his future wife. The couple had their two sons out of wedlock and married in 1901. His father moved to the Patagonia region that year, where he later purchased a sheep ranch. Juan himself was sent away in 1904 to a boarding school in Buenos Aires directed by his paternal grandmother, where he received a strict Catholic upbringing. His father's undertaking ultimately failed, and he died in Buenos Aires in 1928. The youth entered the National Military College in 1911 at age 16 and graduated in 1913. He excelled less in his studies than in athletics, particularly boxing and fencing. Army career. Perón began his military career in an infantry post in Paraná, Entre Rios. He went on to command the post, and in this capacity mediated a prolonged labor conflict in 1920 at La Forestal, then a leading firm in forestry in Argentina. He earned instructor's credentials at the Superior War School, and in 1929 was appointed to the Army General Staff Headquarters. Perón married his first wife, Aurelia Tizons, on 5 January 1929. Perón was recruited by supporters of the director of the War Academy, General José Félix Uriburu, to collaborate in the latter's plans for a military coup against President Hipólito Yrigoyen. Perón, who instead supported General Agustín Justo, was banished to a remote post in northwestern Argentina after Uriburu's successful coup in September 1930. He was promoted to the rank of major the following year and named to the faculty at the Superior War School, however, where he taught military history and published a number of treatises on the subject. He served as military attaché in the Argentine embassy in Chile from 1936 to 1938, and returned to his teaching post. His wife was diagnosed with uterine cancer that year, and died on 10 September at age 30. The couple had no children. Perón was assigned by the War Ministry to study mountain warfare in the Italian Alps in 1939. He also attended the University of Turin for a semester, and served as a military observer in countries across Europe. He studied Benito Mussolini's Italian fascism, Nazi Germany, and other European governments of the time, concluding in his summary, Apuntes de Historia Militar, that social democracy could be a viable alternative to liberal democracy or totalitarian regimes. He returned to Argentina in 1941, and served as an army skiing instructor in Mendoza province. Military government of 1943–1946. In 1943 a coup d'état was led by General Arturo Rawson against conservative President Ramón Castillo, who had been fraudulently elected to office. The military was opposed to Governor Robustiano Patrón Costas, Castillo's hand-picked successor, who was the principal landowner in Salta province, as well as a main stockholder in its sugar industry. As a colonel, and his power of premier minister, Perón took a significant part in the military coup by the go against the conservative civilian government of Castillo. At first an assistant to Secretary of War General Edelmiro Farrell, under the administration of General Pedro Ramirez, he later became the head of the then insignificant Department of Labor. Perón's work in the Labor Department witnessed the passage of a broad range of progressive social reforms designed to improve working conditions, and led to an alliance with the socialist and syndicalist movements in the Argentine labor unions. This caused his power and influence to increase in the military government. After the coup, socialists from the CGTN-1 labor union, through mercantile labor leader Angel Borlenghi and railway union lawyer Juan Atilio Bramulla, made contact with Perón and fellow GO Colonel Domingo Mercante. They established an alliance to promote labor laws that had long been demanded by the workers' movement, to strengthen the unions, and to transform the Department of Labor into a more significant government office. Perón had the Department of Labor elevated to a cabinet-level secretariat in November 1943. Following the devastating January 1944 San Juan earthquake, which claimed over 10,000 lives and leveled the Andes Range city, Perón became nationally prominent in relief efforts. Junta leader Pedro Ramirez entrusted fundraising efforts to him, and Perón marshaled celebrities from Argentina's large film industry and other public figures. For months, a giant thermometer hung from the Buenos Aires obelisk to track the fundraising. The effort's success and relief for earthquake victims earned Perón widespread public approval. At this time, he met a minor radio matinee star, Eva Duarte. Following President Ramirez's January 1944 suspension of diplomatic relations with the Axis powers, the GO junta unseated him in favor of General Edelmiro Farrell. For contributing to his success, Perón was appointed Vice President and Secretary of War, while retaining his labor portfolio. As Minister of Labor, Perón established the INPS, settled industrial disputes in favor of labor unions, and introduced a wide range of social welfare benefits for unionized workers. Employers were forced to improve working conditions and to provide severance pay and accident compensation. The conditions under which workers could be dismissed were restricted. A system of labor court to handle the grievances of workers was established. The working day was reduced in various industries, and paid holidays, vacations were generalized to the entire workforce. Perrin also passed a law providing minimum wages, maximum hours, and vacations for rural workers, froze rural rents, presided over a large increase in rural wages, and helped lumber, wine, sugar and migrant workers organize themselves. From 1943 to 1946, real wages grew by only 4%, but in 1945 Perrin established two new institutions that would later increase wages, the Aguinaldo and the National Institute of Compensation, which implemented a minimum wage and collected data on living standards, prices, and wages, leveraging his authority on behalf of striking abattoir workers and the right to unionize. Perrin became increasingly thought of as presidential timber. On the 18th of September 1945, he delivered an address billed as "From Work to Home and From Home to Work." The speech, prefaced by an excoriation of the conservative opposition, provoked an ovation by declaring that, "We've passed social reforms to make the Argentine people proud to live where they live." Once again, this move fed growing rivalries against Perrin, and on the 9th of October 1945, he was forced to resign by opponents within the armed forces. Arrested 4 days later, he was released due to mass demonstrations organized by the CGT and other supporters. The 17th of October was later commemorated as Loyalty Day. His paramour, Eva Duarte, became hugely popular after helping organize the demonstration, known as Evita. She helped Perrin gain support with labor and women's groups. She and Perrin were married on the 22nd of October. Domestic policy. Perrin and his running mate, Hortensio Quijano, leveraged popular support to victory over a radical civic union-led opposition alliance by about 11% in the February 24, 1946 presidential elections. Perrin's candidacy on the Labour Party ticket, announced the day after the 17th of October 1945 mobilization, became a lightning rod that rallied an unusually diverse opposition against it. The majority of the centrist Radical Civic Union, the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, and most of the conservative National Autonomous Party had already been forged into a fractious alliance in June by interests in the financial sector and the Chamber of Commerce, united solely by the goal of keeping Perrin from the Casa Rosada, organizing a massive kick-off rally in front of Congress on the 8th of December. The Democratic Union nominated José Tamborini and Enrique Mosca, two prominent UCR congressmen. The alliance failed to win over several prominent lawmakers, such as Congressman Ricardo Balbon and Arturo Frondizi and former Córdoba Governor Amadeo Sabatini, all of whom opposed the union's ties to conservative interests. In a bid to support their campaign, U.S. Ambassador Spruill Braden published a white paper, otherwise known as the Blue Book, accusing Perrin, President Farrell and others of fascist ties. Fluent in Spanish, Braden addressed Democratic Union rallies in person, but his move backfired. When Perrin summarized the election as a choice between Perrin and Braden, he also rallied further support by responding to the Blue Book with his own Blue and White Book, which was a playoff of the Argentine flag colors, and focused on the antagonism of Yankee imperialism. He persuaded the president to sign the nationalization of the central bank and the extension of mandatory Christmas bonuses, actions that contributed to his decisive victory. when Perón became president on 4 June 1946. His two stated goals were social justice and economic independence. These two goals avoided Cold War entanglements from choosing between capitalism and socialism. But he had no concrete means to achieve those goals. Perón instructed his economic advisors to develop a 5-year plan with the goals of increasing workers' pay, achieving full employment, stimulating industrial growth of over 40% while diversifying the sector, and greatly improving transportation, communication, energy and social infrastructure. Perón's planning prominently included political considerations. Numerous military allies were fielded as candidates, notably Colonel Domingo Mercante who, when elected governor of the paramount province of Buenos Aires, became renowned for his housing program. Having brought him to power, the General Confederation of Labor was given overwhelming support by the new administration, which introduced labor courts, and filled its cabinet with labor union appointees, such as Juan Atilio Bramuer and Angel Borlenghi. It also made room for amenable wealthy industrialists and socialists such as José Figueroa, a Spanish economist who had years earlier advised that nation's ill-fated regime of Miguel Primo de Rivera. Intervention of their behalf by Perón's appointees encouraged the CGT to call strikes in the face of employers reluctant to grant benefits or honor new labor legislation. Strike activity leapt to 2 million in 1946 and to over 3 million in 1947, helping wrest needed labor reforms, though permanently aligning large employers against the Peronists. Labor unions grew in ranks, from around 500,000 to over 2 million by 1950, primarily in the CGT, which has since been Argentina's paramount labor union, as the country's labor force numbered around 5 million people at the time. Argentina's labor force was the most unionized in South America. During the first half of the 20th century, a widening gap had existed between the classes. Perón hoped to close it through the increase of wages and employment, making the nation more pluralistic and less reliant on foreign trade. Before taking office in 1946, President Perón took dramatic steps which he believed would result in a more economically independent Argentina, better insulated from events such as World War II. He thought there would be another international war. The reduced availability of imports, and the war's beneficial effects on both the quantity and price of Argentine exports had combined to create a $1.7 billion cumulative surplus during those years. In his first 2 years in office, Perón nationalized the central bank and paid off its billion-dollar debt to the Bank of England, nationalized the railways, merchant marine, universities, public utilities, public transport, and, probably most significantly, created a single purchaser for the nation's mostly export-oriented grains and oilseeds, the Institute for the Promotion of Trade. The IAPI wrested control of Argentina's famed grain export sector from entrenched conglomerates such as Bunge Wyborn, but when commodity prices fell after 1948, it began shortchanging growers. IAPI profits were used to fund welfare projects, while internal demand was encouraged by large wage increases given to workers. Average real wages rose by about 35% from 1945 to 1949, while during that same period, labor's share of national income rose from 40% to 49%. Access to healthcare was also made a universal right, by the Workers' Bill of Rights enacted on 24 February 1947, while Social Security was extended to virtually all members of the Argentine working class. From 1946 to 1951, the number of Argentinians covered by Social Security more than tripled, so that in 1951 more than 5 million people were covered by Social Security. Health insurance also spread to new industries, including banking and metalworking. Between 1945 and 1949, real wages went up by 22%, fell between 1949 and 1952, and then increased again from 1953 to 1955, ending up at least 30% higher than in 1946. In proportional terms, wages rose from 41% of national income in 1946, 48 to 49% in 1952-55. The boost in the real incomes of workers was encouraged by government policies such as the enforcement of minimum wage laws, controls on the prices of food and other basic consumption items, and extending housing credits to workers.
Brought to you by Wikividi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?